Hello everybody, my name is Robius, and welcome back to the second episode in the revival series of Assassin's Creed: The Real History. In these videos, I bring you through the actual history of a component within the Assassin's Creed franchise, showing you what did and didn't really happen in the past, while comparing the game's interpretation to the historical source material. As always, please be aware of significant story spoilers ahead. Having said that, let's proceed with today's episode, in which we'll be taking a look at one of the better-known mentors of the Assassin's Order, Rashīd ad-Dīn Sinān, who is historically also referred to as the Old Man of the Mountain, but that you likely better remember as Al-Mu'allim, or the Mentor as the title is translated. Before we get into the actual video, it's worth noting that the history of this individual remains somewhat argued to this day. Among the records covering his life, certain Western interpretations present different stories than their Eastern counterparts. In general, it's predominantly agreed that a large portion of the Western records are peppered with myths and legends, while those kept by Eastern historians from the area in which he lived are considered to be more extensive and factual. However, in an attempt to remain as informative as possible, I'll cover his generally agreed upon history, while also touching on some of the legends attributed to the Old Man of the Mountain. Alright, so let's begin by discussing the historical period which occurred before his appearance in the Assassin's Creed franchise. Rashīd ad-Dīn Sinān is said to have been born in the city of Basra, located within the contemporary borders of Iraq, at some point between the years of 1132 and 1135. He traveled to the stronghold of Alamut in his youth, where he became a student of the local Ismailis, a group who would eventually come to be known in the West as the Assassins. By the year 1162, Rashīd had risen in the ranks of the Assassins and was tasked by its current leader, Hassan II, to establish a new stronghold in Syria, from which he would spearhead the efforts of his Nizari Ismaili religious sect by disseminating contradictory Islamic law from the area. This stronghold was Masyaf, and over the following years, Rashīd ad-Dīn Sinān would consolidate his control over most northern Syrian districts from this seat of power. In this period, Sinan entered into a varying series of negotiations with his neighboring factions. At this particular point in time, Nur ad-Din and Salah ad-Din, the leaders of the Sunni Ayyubid dynasty, were waging a holy war against the Crusaders, which also represented a significant problem for the Assassins, who followed a minority Shia branch of Islam. For that reason, seeing the Crusaders as a lesser threat, Rashīd attempted to open peaceful negotiations with them, despite their on-and-off hostilities over the past few decades. By 1173, it appeared his attempts were leading to success, as the Assassins' ambassador met with the King of Jerusalem, Amalric I, and the meeting ended on good terms. Unfortunately, as the ambassador was returning to Rashīd, he was killed by a Knight Templar who had been personally sent by the Grand Master of the Order, as they opposed an alliance with the Assassins. In response to this, the King of Jerusalem led his troops to the Templars' lodge and arrested this knight. Amalric sent his apologies to Sinan, and it appeared that the negotiations would continue. However, upon the king's death in 1174, relations with his successor did not bring about the desired peace accords at that time. Within the same year, Nur ad-Din died, and Salah ad-Din became the unequivocal leader of his Sunni faction, which was still expanding in Egypt and Syria. In hopes of eliminating this potential threat, as was requested by his allies, in the next 2 years, Rashīd sent some of his loyal assassins to kill the Sultan. Both of these attempts failed, and in response, during a march on Aleppo, Salah ad-Din attacked and destroyed many of the assassins' Syrian positions. In the year 1176, this conflict had reached its peak, and the Sultan began to lay siege to the stronghold of Masyaf. Interestingly enough, the siege was soon lifted, and the struggle between the two powerful men was put to rest. Historically, due to the lack of records on these negotiations, it is best to say that their peace agreement was brokered under vague circumstances. However, there are many tales claiming to explain this development, although they're not confirmed. One among these states that during the siege, while sleeping in his guarded tent in the middle of his camp, the Sultan suddenly awoke to see a figure leaving his bedside. Upon further investigation, he saw that next to his bed was a plate of hot scones, shaped in the assassin symbol. Beside the scones was a note, pinned by a poisoned dagger, that stated he would be killed if he didn't lift the siege. Soon after, it is said an alliance was brokered between Salah ad-Din's Saracens and Rashīd's assassins. At this point, we'll move on to the next chapter in the video, where we'll be covering the period in which Rashīd was depicted in the Assassin's Creed series. Keep in mind that despite being shown in Assassin's Creed Revelations during 1189, the events surrounding this depiction were all fictional. In contrast, his coverage in the first Assassin's Creed game is a better starting point when discussing his historical representation. By 1191, the year where the first game began, the Third Crusade was in full swing, and Conrad of Montferrat, the defender of one of the few remaining Crusader cities of Tyre was becoming a claimant to the throne of Jerusalem. His claim was begrudgingly supported by Richard the Lionheart and other leading Crusaders, and he was soon designated as the new King of Jerusalem. However, before his coronation could occur, he was killed by two assassins disguised as monks while in Tyre, the city he controlled and had defended against Saracen forces. To this day, historians on all sides disagree on who ordered his death. European sources blame Richard I as having asked Sinan to kill Conrad, while Middle Eastern sources point the finger to Salah ad-Din as having ordered the assassination, and other individuals state it was solely the initiative of the Old Man of the Mountain to kill this soon-to-be king of the Crusader state. It could be argued that this assassination was paralleled in the first Assassin's Creed game when Altair was tasked with killing William de Montferrat, Conrad's father. Not long after this period, a peace treaty was signed between Richard the Lionheart and Salah ad-Din, thus ending the Third Crusade. Interestingly enough, this peace treaty also included a section which would have the Syrian Assassins' territory respected as well. For the remaining years of his life, Rashīd is believed to have lived in relative seclusion from the outside world until his eventual death in 1193, which is mainly attributed to natural causes. Moving on, we have now reached the final chapter of the video, where we will review everything discussed so far and consider the differences between the way the first Assassin's Creed game and Assassin's Creed Revelations portrayed the individual versus his relatively confirmed history. To begin, let's quickly list the major ways the game differed from history. For starters, despite being one of the most iconic leaders of the real-life Order of Assassins, Rashīd's organization was not exactly as depicted in the game. His men were trained in combat, infiltration, and assassination. However, they weren't like the characters in the game in the sense that they were not trained in parkour and were never expected to return from their missions. The goal was usually to kill the target and then to die. Next, although their fortress was historically attacked by different factions, both major sieges of Masyaf covered in the games were fictional. The Templars did not attack Rashīd's stronghold in 1189 as is depicted in Revelations, nor did they in 1191 as was shown in the opening segment of the first Assassin's Creed game. Lastly, the Old Man of the Mountain was not killed in 1191 by a former student, but is supposed to have died of natural causes in 1193. Now, having said all that, let's look into what the game did right and how they merged their fictional elements with the real history. A portion of the game I found particularly interesting was during the fictional siege of Masyaf led by Robert de Sablé in the first game, because it featured the first example of Rashīd ad-Dīn Sinān's representation being merged with stories about the original leader of the assassins from the fortress of Alamut, Hassan Sabah. Specifically, I'm referring to the moment in the game where Al-Mualim is speaking to the Templars and has three of his men, including Altair, jump off one of Masyaf's tower to their apparent death as a sign of their faith and complete lack of fear towards death.
My men do not fear death, Robert. They welcome it, and the rewards it brings.
Good! Then they shall have it all around!
Follow me, and do so without hesitation.
Show this fool knight what it is to have no fear. Go to God!
In the game, this is a distraction that allows Altair to deploy a trap and rout the Templars. In reality, this is tied to a story about how Hassan used the same method to dissuade Seljuk Turks laying siege to his fortress of Alamut. However, according to that account, the men actually jumped to their death as a sign of absolute obedience. Next, although the assassinations depicted in the first AC game were predominantly all fictional, they were representative of the type of operations Rashīd ordered in that period, by having his men disguise themselves or infiltrate an area, gather information, and eventually kill their targets. As mentioned earlier, a good example of this was the fictional assassination of William de Montferrat, which held some parallels to the actual assassination of his son, Conrad de Montferrat. Lastly, another example of merging the stories of the two aforementioned assassin mentors was when Altair returned to face and fight Rashīd in AC1. This is reminiscent of another story attributed to Hassan, where it is said one of his students returned from a botched assassination on the Seljuk Sultan, seeking answers from his mentor who he blamed for lying to him. It was at this point in this tale where the mentor revealed his maxim of, "Nothing is an absolute reality, all is permitted," which was clearly used as the inspiration for the fictional Assassin Brotherhood's motto of, "Nothing is true, everything is permitted." Overall, I would say that despite the game's tendency to lean more on the legends surrounding the real-world assassin order when depicting Rashīd ad-Dīn Sinān, he was generally well represented in the series. Historically, he is recorded as an iconic leader within his order, operating with independence from his superiors in Alamut. Historians refer to him as a master of diplomacy and political manipulation, as was highlighted by the well-timed alliances he developed with the Crusaders and Saracens at crucial points in the assassin's lifetime. In my opinion, all of these traits were represented in the game, as he led his forces with an iron fist and brought them to their peak in power. The reach of his will was displayed in the way he had his assassins slaying adversaries across the Levant in his name. The only two main exceptions to this were the way he was depicted as a secret member of the Templars and a traitor to his Brotherhood, which was a plot device for the Assassin's Creed franchise, and the manner in which the game had him partake in events which come from tales that are solely attributed to Hassani-Sabah. However, to be fair, I didn't really have a problem with that last point, as I liked the way it further fleshed out the mystical European interpretation of the Assassin Brotherhood and its leaders. And with that, we have concluded our second episode in the revival series of Assassin's Creed: The Real History. I'd like to take a moment and thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please show your support by sharing the series with your friends. If there is any element in the Assassin's Creed series you'd like to see in a future video, let me know in the comment section. If you'd like to learn more about this individual, the sources used for making this video are in the description bar below. Thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you in a future video.